Hello, and welcome to a Spider Strategies free monthly training webinar. It's March of 2019, and this month's webinar is about replacing users in Scoreboard. Or, as I wanted to call this webinar, oh boy, Bob is leaving the company, and now I need Jane to do what Bob does in Scoreboard. How do I do that? My name is Tom Keating, and I'm a training and customer experience consultant here at Spider Strategies. Before we move on, please take note of my email address and feel free to reach out to me with any questions regarding this topic or any other training or customer experience topics with regard to Scoreboard. Let's talk about our agenda today. It's a simple 2-point agenda. First, we'll talk about replacing a user with method 1, which is changing the username for an existing user account. And then we'll get into replacing a user method 2, which is creating a new user account and assigning permissions and responsibilities appropriately for that new user. Let's first talk about method 1, which is changing the username for an existing user account. A key concept behind this method is that every user account in Scoreboard has a unique system user ID, which is how Scoreboard really sees and identifies that user. The personal username that is shown in various areas of Scoreboard, such as notes, reports, history logs, is simply a more palatable, human reader friendly personalized alias for the underlying unique system user ID. The Scoreboard application permissions, access rights, ownership, update and assignee responsibilities, and really everything are tied to the unique system user ID, not the username. If, when you change users, you want to transfer everything that the Scoreboard system has assigned to a given unique user system ID to a new person, you can just change the name properties for an existing user account. When we say everything, we mean everything that goes from the existing user to the new user, including user group membership, which includes or implies application permissions that come from membership in groups, access and visibility to organizations that come from membership in groups, everything about the homepage that the original user has set up and experiences, such as alerts, measure ownership, measure update responsibilities, and tasks for initiatives, and the bookmarks library of easily accessible applications that the original user has created. The advantages to using this first method, which is simply changing the username for an existing user account, is that it's really fast and easy to do. All you need to do is simply change the existing user profile name and you're done. And another advantage is that the new user gets everything the old user was set up to do and see and was responsible for. The disadvantages to method number 1 of changing the username for an existing user account, again, is that the new user gets everything the old user was set up to do and see and was responsible for. And it does beg the question of whether the new user should really be taking on everything in terms of responsibilities, visibility, everything, bookmarks, all of it from the old user. Also, this is important, is if you change the name, you will have a complete loss of the previous user's name everywhere in Scoreboard, including the loss of that username in any kind of historical perspective or records of what that original first user did. There is really no way to delineate the original user's activities from the new user's activities in Scoreboard. Let's get into a demonstration of method 1, changing a username for an existing user account. We'll log into Scoreboard as a user named user1 and review what user1 sees both on the home page and deeper within Scoreboard. Starting with the responsibilities that user1 has, we see that user1 has 3 KPIs that he owns. We can click on KPIs I own and review that he's an owner of book revenue, product revenue, and training revenue. Similarly, user 1 has 6 KPIs that he's responsible for updating. Again, product, training, and book revenue, as well as some marketing KPIs such as ad clicks, client meetings, and leads. User 1 is also responsible for a task tied to an initiative, which is to develop training internally. Furthermore, from the homepage, if we go to the bookmarks section, we see that user 1 has set himself up with 5 different bookmarked applications or elements, such as a financial overview dashboard, increase ad click dashboard, and so forth. So a couple different dashboards and a couple reports have been created by user 1 in his personal bookmarks library. Lastly, on the homepage, we see that user 1 has subscribed to some different alerts. If we show the alerts that user 1 has received and review user 1's alert subscriptions, we see that user 1 has subscribed to an alert about increased lead generation, asking to be alerted if notes are added. For training revenue, asked to be alerted if KPI values change below or equal to 175,000, and with regard to revenue, if the score change is below or equal to 5. Furthermore, if we dive into one of the KPIs that user 1 is responsible for updating, such as product revenue, we can see that user 1 has a presence with regard to the product revenue KPI, in that user 1 has previously created a note regarding product revenue and is assigned as, of course, the author of that note. And also with regard to history behind product revenue, if we look at the history log for product revenue and all of the events associated with product revenue, we can see that recently user 1 has had some activity in terms of updating or changing the actual value for the product revenue KPI. Now, if we want to use method 1 of simply changing the user name associated with this unique user ID that user 1 presently employs, what we can do is log out of Scoreboard as user 1 and log back in as an administrative user with administrative capabilities to create new users and assign different username to existing users. We can log in as that administrative user, go to the settings or administrative console, go to under security, the users section, find our existing user 1 user, and quite simply change the properties of this unique user, which again is tied to an underlying system ID, to be in this case user 2. And we'll just go through here and quickly make some user 2 changes to the setup of this existing user from user 1 to now user 2. And click Save. After making that simple change of changing the name properties associated with the existing user that was previously known as user 1, if we again log out of Scoreboard and now try logging in as the original user 1, no surprise, it doesn't work. That's an invalid username and password combination. If, however, we now try to log in as user 2, we're able to log in, and you see that the home page for user 2 now exactly replicates what we saw previously for user 1. The same KPI responsibilities in terms of ownership, the same book, product, and training revenue for ownership, the same 6 KPIs that user 2 is now responsible for updating, the same task associated with the Develop Training Internally initiative, the exact same bookmarks library of dashboards and reports. With regard to alerts, the same collection of alerts and subscriptions to alerts, the same types of notes added, threshold changes, what have you, with KPI values and or score changes. So in this case, user 2 has taken on everything that user 1 was responsible for. If we again dive into one of the KPIs, that was product revenue that we looked at earlier, and take a look at what has changed here, if we go to the notes area for this product revenue and look at the same note that was actually written by user 1, you see that now user 2 has been identified as the author of that note. And this is where we start getting into an area that may not really be desired. You may not want for someone to think that user 2 actually wrote this note when in fact it was authored by user 1. And similarly, with regard to history, if we look at the history behind product revenue and look at, again, all events as we did just a few moments ago, and scroll to the bottom here, you see that all of the actions that were actually taken by user 1 have now been assigned in terms of the ownership, if you will, or who did them, is the user is now being identified as user 2, when really, in fact, it was user 1 who took those actions back on March 17th and March 19th. So at this point, we'll move on to discussing method number 2 of changing or replacing users within Scoreboard. To that end, I'll return to my original presentation deck and use it to orient you to the method number 2, which is creating new user account and assigning permissions and responsibilities appropriately. This second method does have some advantages, primarily that the end result is a new unique Scoreboard system user that's customized to the needs and wants of the new person. That new user is not going to be quote-unquote subjected to everything the old user was set up to do and see and was responsible for. Also, another advantage to this second method is that the system log retains all of the old usernames' historical participation and contribution in Scoreboard, such as we saw in the notes area and in the history area of Scoreboard. The disadvantages to creating a new user account and assigning permissions and responsibilities is really the time and effort that's required to review all the old users' ownership, update, and task responsibilities from the home page, review the old users' groups memberships. That's very important because it's through the group membership that any user acquires permissions and organization, visibility, and access. Also, the work to create the new user from scratch and assign that user to groups appropriately to acquire permissions and access. And lastly, to manually assign KPI ownership and updater responsibilities. Or you can also create reports to achieve that step en masse, which we will be covering, and to manually assign new users to any appropriate tasks. Let's jump into a demonstration of method 2, again, creating a new user account and assigning permissions and responsibilities appropriately. I'll start by logging in to Scoreboard. I should point out at this point that after our first demonstration, I went back in to Scoreboard as the administrative power user and changed the username associated with the existing user back to user 1 so that we could start our second demonstration from the same point that we did for the original first demonstration on changing the username. So again, I am logged in now as the original user 1, and again at this point what we need to do is review that user's responsibilities within Scoreboard. This is just what we saw earlier, where we can look at the responsibilities of ownership, KPIs that user 1 is assigned as an owner. We can look at KPIs that this user has been assigned to as an updater. And again, we can look at the tasks that are assigned to this user. Now, what you want to do at this point is take note of all of these different ownership, updater, and task responsibilities so that you know what you need to recreate for the new user that you'll be creating in a little bit. Also, while we're in here, if you like, you can also review the alerts that this original user has subscribed to, should the new user want to, again, replicate some of the alerts. And again, that is viewed under the Edit Subscriptions area of the Alerts section on the home page. And you may also want to just take note of the bookmarks that the original user has chosen to put in their bookmarks library. Again, the implication here is that the new user will not, again, automatically be required to have the same bookmarks or the same alert subscriptions, but it may be helpful to know about them should the new user want to replicate those alerts and bookmarks choices. But the key here is to acknowledge the responsibilities of the original user. Now that we know about the original user's responsibilities, we need to investigate that user's association or membership in Scoreboard user groups. To do so, I need to log in as a different user with power user administrative privileges. I'll log in as a power user. As that power user, I'll go to the settings gear icon in the lower left corner to open up the settings menu, and we'll go to the users section under security. We'll find the user that we're looking to replace within Scoreboard, which again in this case is our user 1. And we were in here earlier and we played and changed with the username. In this case, we're focusing our attention on the membership of groups down towards the bottom. And we see that this user 1 is a member of the finance and marketing group. Through this membership in the finance and marketing group, that user 1 is receiving permissions to do a variety of different tasks within Scoreboard, and they're also receiving access to different organizations within Scoreboard. So this user right now is set up to access the financial organization, the marketing organization, and the Mobile World Inc. organization. When we create a new user that will take over all of the roles and responsibilities for user 1, we're going to need to give the new user the same membership in appropriate groups. Again, because it's through the membership in a group that a user inherits advanced permissions and organization access within Scoreboard. So now that we know everything we need to know about user 1 in terms of their responsibilities and their group membership, it's time to create a new user, user 2, who can take on the same responsibilities and access permissions that user 1 presently enjoys. To that end, we'll go to the users section under security. I'm still logged on as a power user with administrative rights to add users, so I'll click add at the upper right of the list of users, and we'll create a new user simply called user 2. I'll give user 2 a basic fake email address and provide a first name, a last name, a password, and retype the password for user 2 to create that user. The last important step, of course, when creating a new user is again to give them membership in some type of appropriate user group. So in this case, we know that we want to put this new user 2 in that finance and marketing group. So I'll click add group and find the finance and marketing group. Of course, a new user can be made a member of more than one group, but in this case, we're just looking to replicate what user 1 was able to do, so we'll limit it to that one user group. And in the lower right-hand corner, click Save. User 2 has now been created and is listed at the bottom of the list of all current users within Scoreboard. Let's go see what user 2 experiences when they log in. I'll log out as the power user administrator and turn around and log in as user 2. User 2 has successfully, of course, gained access to Scoreboard, but you'll note that at the present time, over in the responsibilities area, there are no KPIs that user 2 owns, none that she updates, and none that are any tasks associated with user 2. Similarly, there are no alerts. And if we look at the bookmarks section of Scoreboard, you see that there are no bookmarks. But with regard to access of what user 2 can see within Scoreboard, thanks to their, again, membership in the Finance and Marketing group, they do have visibility to the Mobile World Inc. and its underlying scorecard elements, the financial organization and its scorecard and elements, and lastly, the marketing organization as well. So the assignment in the Finance and Marketing group is obviously taken hold for user 2, and now it's just a process of getting user 2 appropriately assigned in terms of their responsibilities as the owner, the updater, and the assignee to the tasks that we saw for user 1. To best achieve our next desired step here, which is assigning the appropriate responsibilities to user 2, I'll sign off as user 2. I'll log out, I should say, as user 2, and I'll log back in as an administrative power user within Scoreboard so that I acquire all the necessary permissions to do all of the replacement that we need to do and run some reports to make our life of providing user 2 with responsibilities in terms of ownership and updating that much easier. So I'm logged in as, again, a power user at this point in time, and what I need to do is assign user 2 as an assignee to an existing initiative that user 1 was responsible for. I'll navigate into the initiatives section of Scoreboard, open the financial organization, and find the Develop Training Internally initiative that we saw earlier that user 1 was an assignee to. To add user 2 as another assignee to this initiative, we simply move into edit mode within the initiative section. Towards the bottom of the definition of our Develop Training Internally initiative, we can add a user or group, and we'll simply add user 2 as now the assignee for this initiative, and we can delete user 1 as an assignee to that initiative. At this point, we click Save, and the desired change has been made, assigning user 2 as an assignee to the Develop Training Internally initiative. Our next step is then to provide ownership and updater responsibilities to some scorecard KPIs within the financial organization. I've navigated into the scorecard section. We're looking at the financial organization and the financial profit and loss scorecard. And I remember from what we saw earlier for user 1 that user 1 is responsible for product revenue, training revenue, and book revenue as both an owner and an updater. To add user 2 as a new owner or updater for any of these KPIs, you simply select the KPI, click the Edit button at the bottom of the black navigation pane, scroll to the bottom of the properties for this particular KPI, and add an owner. In this case, it will be, of course, user 2, and add an updater. Again, user 2. At this point, you can click Save, and also, if you'd like, you can, again, remove user 1 as an owner and or an updater at this point. And I'll click Save. So that's the manual method to updating an existing KPI with a new owner and or updater. But there is another more advanced approach when you have a situation where an old user has many KPIs that they are responsible for as an owner or an updater. What you can do is create and run a report to investigate what KPIs any particular user is responsible for as an owner and updater, and then do a mass edit to change or adjust the ownership and updater responsibilities for those KPIs. To demonstrate how to create a report of this nature, I will recall that I saw that user 1 had responsibilities as an owner and an updater for both financial department or financial organization elements and marketing organization elements. So I'm going to navigate to the Mobile World Inc. organization, or the Tier 1 parent level for our scorecard, and I will open up the Charts and Reports section and create a new report. What we're looking to do here is employ the report writer functionality to create a custom report giving us visibility to existing responsibilities for ownership and updater. I'll click next and tell it that what we're looking for is scorecard element names, and we'll also bring in their ID for that information. We want to know who the owners are, and we want to know who the updaters are for scorecard elements. Then I'll click next. We need to filter this report to point to just what we want to see, which again is the owner and updater responsibilities assigned to user 1 at the current time. So I'll click Add to add a current filter, and we're going to filter on owners first of all, and we will be looking for a specific user or group in terms of who are the owners. And down towards the bottom, I'll select Add Owner and start typing in the user 1 name and immediately locate user 1 as the owner. So this is one filter where I'm asking to find what KPIs does user 1 own, and I'll click Done. I also want another filter for updaters. So again, I'll click Add. Again, filter on, in this case, updaters. Towards the bottom, again, we're looking for a specific user or group. And the updater that we're looking for, again, is user 1. Now, before I proceed, I'm going to scroll down a little ways here within the Add Row Filter interface and make sure that I set this up as this new filter as an OR. So I want owners or updaters, not necessarily an and, someone that is both an owner and an updater for a particular KPI. I'd like to see both of them. And I'll click Done. So I've created a two-part filter for owners that are equal to user 1 or updaters that are equal to user 1, and I can click Get Report. The report returns to me pretty much exactly what I expected to see. You will recall that earlier in this lesson we showed you how the user 1 was responsible for 6 different KPIs as an updater, but we subsequently removed user 1 as an updater from one of the revenue measures. It was the product revenue measure. So now we're limited to just 5 distinct KPIs that user 1 is an updater for. And now down to just the 2 owner assignments within the again the revenue area, the financial area of Scoreboard. So we have this report giving us the insight as to what we need to change from user 1 to user 2. And this is where we can take advantage of a great feature of our report writer module, which is this mass edit capability in the lower right corner. I'll click mass edit, and we will select the things that we want to uniquely and individually change. In this case, I'm going to select everything in terms of overview. In the overview tab, I'll select all of these different distinct KPIs, and we're going to say that we're going to, in this case, edit the updaters for all 5 of these KPIs en masse. So I'll click Edit Selected Items, and what we're going to change is the updaters, and we will add the following updaters of user 2. And at this point, we'll click Save. Now you'll notice at the top in blue, Scoreboard is indicating that 5 objects have been successfully modified, but the report has not yet been updated to show those changes that we made. Okay, but when we're done here, we can click Done and make that change occur en masse. The other thing that we want to do is change the owner responsibilities for just 2 of the existing KPIs. So in this case, it's the training revenue and the book revenue. So we'll also edit those selected items. And in a very similar process, in this case, what we'll do is change the owners property to add a new user, which will of course be our user 2, and click Save. Okay, once again up at the top in blue, you see that now 2 objects have been successfully modified, and at this point we are done with the changes. Be aware that what you could also do here is you can remove user 1 during or via this again mass edit process. I'm not going to do that because in just a few minutes I'll actually be deleting user 1 from the whole scoreboard system. So there's really no need to also remove him from these updater and ownership responsibilities, knowing that just around the corner I'll be deleting user 1 completely. So at this point I'll click done to complete the mass edit steps and review here that we now do see, as expected, user 2 assigned as an owner for training revenue and book revenue, and also as an updater for all 5 of the KPIs in this report. Having now achieved our desired changes to get user 2 involved as an owner, an updater, and an assignee to a task, let's log out of Scoreboard. We don't need to save the result of that report. It has achieved what we needed it to do. So I'll log out as the power user that I was previously logged in as, and we'll log in as our new user 2 and see the results of our efforts. Notice that upon landing at the home page, user 2 now has some responsibilities, and they are exactly what we had hoped to see, which is 3 KPIs that user 2 now owns, 6 KPIs that user 2 is now the updater for, 1 task that user 2 has been assigned to. Again, none of the work that we did has any impact, as we discussed earlier, on alerts or bookmarks for user 2. Those areas are wide open for user 2 to customize and personalize those areas according to her heart's content, and she is not being subjected to whatever user 1 had previously set up. Now, with regard to just update capabilities and notes and the history that has been retained behind the scenes, if we go into the KPIs I update and work briefly with our first KPI of product revenue, I'll move ahead 1 month into March of 2019 and simply provide a value here for that month of March 2019 for product revenue. Also, before I submit or update that KPI, I'm also going to provide a note that is, of course, being authored by me now as a user. This is a user 2 note. And I'll click Add Note. And then close the Notes interface and update the KPIs. Now, after taking that step, we can drill into product revenue and see some of the detail available in the scorecard view of that product revenue KPI. Here in the scorecard view of product revenue, I can see at the bottom that there is now the existence of 2 notes. If I open the notes pane, I see that there is, of course, a new note provided by user 2, and if I click on it, the author of that note is, of course, being correctly identified as user 2. Similarly, if I look at the other previously existing note, you see that it is, again, was authored by user 1 and continues to be correctly identified as such. Also, with regard to the history behind this product revenue KPI, if we go to the history view and again look at all events and scroll to the bottom of all the events that have occurred over time on product revenue, we see that a couple events have recently occurred as authored or done by user 2. And again, we're still retaining the activity of user 1 back previously in our history for this product revenue KPI. So all in all, at this point, we have achieved what we desired to do in terms of creating a new user named user 2 who took on the roles and responsibilities previously assigned to user 1. Again, as I said just a few moments ago, user 2 has her own capability to define her own desired alerts as well as her own desired bookmarks elements. Now that we have set up user 2 appropriately, we can go ahead and remove user 1 from the scoreboard system. To do so, I'll again need to log out as user 2 and log back in as an administrative power user with the appropriate permissions to add and delete users. Once again, we'll navigate into the settings area And again, under the security heading, the users section of settings. And what we'll do is find user 1. And with user 1 selected, down towards the middle left, there's a delete button. So we'll go ahead and delete user 1. Scoreboard will prompt me to confirm that I really want to delete user 1. And I'll say, yes, I do want to delete user 1. And user 1 is now gone. Now let's take a look at the result of user 1 having been deleted in terms of, again, the history and retention of any kind of records of user 1's contribution or activity within Scoreboard. So one last time, I'll log out as the administrative user, and I'll log back in once again as user 2. Now, our goal here is to just investigate what has been retained in terms of history around product revenue and notes related to product revenue that we just looked at. So I'll log back into the KPIs I update area. Once again, I'm going to navigate just to March of 2019, and then we'll drill down into the product revenue KPI. Once again, let's take a look at the notes area. And we see that the all-time note that was written by user 1 is, of course, retained. If you investigate that note, you'll note that it is now being acknowledged as having been authored by a removed user. It does not indicate the name of the removed user, but it does indicate that this is a historical note created sometime in the past by a user that has now been removed. And of course, the user 2 note is still as it was before. And then if we look at the history for product revenue, and once again, one last time, all of the events that have occurred with product revenue recently, we do see that in terms of that removed user, it is acknowledging that the removed user was user 1 who did some changing of actual values and some adding of notes and what have you. But again, that's how now history is portrayed with a user that has been subsequently deleted from the Scoreboard system. And at this point, I believe we have achieved both of our goals for today's agenda around replacing users in Scoreboard with new users in Scoreboard, and both methods. First of all, changing a username for an existing user account, and secondly, creating a new user account and assigning permissions and responsibilities appropriately. And before I let you go, I'd like to ask you to please again join us in April for our next free Scoreboard webinar. Thank you very much for watching this webinar today. Please again feel free to contact me, Tom Keating, at any time with follow-up questions. I'm again available at tom.keating@spiderstrategies.com or via our education department at learn@spiderstrategies.com. Thank you again for your time, and have a great day.